and I'll be happy. All that things outside of us will make us happy. So there are 6 stages of grief that we go through. Obviously, not all of them go in the same order. Often we'll go to step 2 or 3, and then we'll get stuck and need to go back to step 2. And that's fine. We can sometimes go right to the end and then have to go right back again. It depends also, pardon, I'm sorry, I'm echoing here, but am I sitting too close? Yeah, okay. Yeah, it depends on how severe each particular stage is for you. For me, I was very angry. I was angry at my daughter, but mostly I was very sad because I didn't know what I would do without her. I had, by that stage, when my daughter was 5, I had gotten a divorce from my husband, and so she was my all. My son, who was 11 when we got a divorce, saw the writing on the wall, and being a strong man, he separated himself from me and wouldn't allow me to make that kind of connection with him. He made a point of leaving the home and seeing to his friends and so on outside. So from that point of view, I was very glad. Unfortunately, he also picked up some of the codependency in as much as his choice of girlfriends was nothing short of disastrous. But at least he didn't have some of the issues that I had with the codependency. So the 6 stages of grief that there are, the first one is shock and denial, and that's when we realize for the first time that this is what I've been doing. So I'd like you just to have a think, and I've left a little bit of space there. If you feel that you have, that you have registered what it is that you are codependent about, if you would write that in that space there. I've said here that this step is particularly difficult because of the strength of the denial. Yes, the denial that we have to admit this, because it's so useful to us. It becomes this codependent behavior becomes our mainstay and our strength, and we're being now told you have to give it up. Yeah, so of course, unless we're able to identify it, we can't make progress with this particular thing of codependency. The second step, pardon me, that we come to is anger. And we're angry at having to give up something. It's like when you decide to go on a diet. One can get very angry at the thought of somebody else can have a chocolate and I can't have a chocolate, or I have to give it up because this is good for me. And usually we're angry at the person who has told us we are codependent. I was very angry with Claire. When she told me, in fact, I was angrier with her therapist because it was her therapist who was teaching Claire to be more healthier. And she was the one who pointed out to Claire that she was codependent and that Claire had to lay down some boundaries as far as her mother is concerned. So I wasn't very happy with her. I mean, I was terribly sad, but I also was angry and I wanted to get her back. And so often what happens is that, or certainly when I get angry, when I used to get angry, I don't do this anymore, at least not often, I withdraw and I go into a sulk. And so I'm going to pay you back, but by my silence, not by what I say. I'll have this massive sulk, which is, my daughter always tells me that I can't hide my feelings on my face. So she says, you can see your sulk coming from a mile away, Mom. Yeah. So, we fortunately got the kind of relationship now where she can say, oh, I can see a sulk coming on, and we can laugh about it. So we feel angry towards the person who's pointed out our codependent habits. We want to blame someone in order to shift the shame. It's very shameful. Certainly I found it very shameful to admit my weakness. And the times since then that I've had to deal with codependent issues, each time the shame comes up because it's expressing a personal need that goes deep inside, and to me needs have always been painful. I think it comes from my mom, who told me you mustn't have needs. Although, of course, we know that they're normal. But to me, I spent a lot of years, many years, trying to get rid of needs so that I wouldn't need anybody. So anger can also be directed towards God. I don't know how many of you have railed at God. I have done quite a lot. I'll tell you a story about that a bit later. It's very important to express anger. Anger is not a sin. Anger is just an emotion. We are taught very often by our parents that anger is a sin and that we mustn't be angry. It's what we do with the anger that can possibly lead to sinful behavior, but the actual emotion of anger is not a sin. Anger is a normal activity, a normal emotion which must be expressed, and if it isn't expressed, it leads to depression. Yeah. So they say anger turned inwards leads to depression, because and it's interesting that I've often observed in children that some children express their anger outwards, some express it inwards. And it seems to be not something that you can determine, it's something that they pick up from their parents, as to how they deal with anger. Then next we go on to the next stage of depression, and that's a typical stage, the depression, not only coming after anger, but because it's very sad what we're having to go through. And it says here, the type of depression is temporary. It resolves itself, and it's a normal process of dealing with the pain you've been feeling. The interesting thing is that it's like a vicious cycle. The pain that you felt initially is what leads to the codependent behavior. The codependency is, in fact, a type of coping mechanism to cope with your pain. And now you're having to give up the codependency, which is painful in itself, but you're also left to face the pain that was there before. And that you have to change your coping mechanism to find a new way of dealing with that pain that you have left from your childhood. Then number 4. Bargaining and magical thinking. I think I'm a past master at the art of magical thinking. Yeah, well, the bargaining is often with God. Yes, if God will do such and such for you, then I'll do such and such for you. And this is where my story comes in. When I had my son literally 9 and a bit months after I was married, and we'd always decided we wanted more than one child. And so, of course, I tried straight away to have another child. And the year after my son was born, I had an ectopic pregnancy, which meant that my chances of having another baby were only 50%. And of course I said, but that's no problem. I'm a really good Catholic. I just pray to God, and what you ask for, He'll give you. And well, I prayed for 3 years, and God didn't give me what I was asking for. So I'm afraid in my arrogance, I turned around to God and said, that's it. You've had your chance, out the door. And I stayed out of God's door for 20 years. I was so angry with Him and so hurt and so disappointed by His not giving me what I wanted. And I couldn't make sense of it in any way whatsoever. God, in His mercy, let me fall pregnant 4 years later. But of course it wasn't good enough for me. I was still angry with God because I felt that this wasn't from Him, it just was a fluke. But God is so immensely patient and kind and compassionate, because when my daughter was 17, 18, St. Martin's ran an Alpha course here at the church. And my daughter, hadn't gone to church for 20 years. My daughter came to attend the Alpha course, and she was due to give a testimony on the last night, which always happens during Alpha. And she asked me, Mom, please will you come and listen to me, because they've asked me to give my testimony. And I said, Clever, you know I don't go to church. Please, Mom. It's a special thing for me. So I said, okay, I'll go. Guess what? I've been back ever since. God has His ways, and, it doesn't matter what goes wrong and what you do and what you say, He's always there to accept you back. Yeah. So that was my story with anger and magical thinking with God. Magical thinking is such a common inner dialogue. If only I was thinner, people would love me more. How many of us ladies haven't felt that way? I could buy the house of my dreams, I'd be happy. We are taught to look for our happiness outside of ourselves, instead of the only place you can find happiness is within. Number 5, sadness. Sadness is a normal part of life and an appropriate response to sad events and so on. And yet how often, in fact it's almost an immediate response, we try to get away from sadness, but we can't escape it. And I look back and I think of how much damage I did in my daughter's life and in my son's life through my codependency. I've learned to forgive myself because God forgives me. And I know I've looked at the reasons why I became codependent. But nonetheless, I'm sad for the effects that it had on others as well as on myself. Much of life that I missed out on was because of my codependency and the various things that it did. It made me feel in the way I behaved. And so the sadness is appropriate, and we need to honor the sadness that we feel and spend time caring for ourselves and not berating ourselves for the things that we did, because we didn't know any better at that stage of our lives. Sometimes the things we do to our children are because we didn't know any better and because we were taught to do it that way, or we do it because of something our parents did. But nonetheless, we need to make amends for that. I'd like you just to fill in what makes you sad. we ready to move on? Number 8 says, take a deep breath. The hardest part is behind you. It's forgiveness, resolution, and acceptance. I don't know if I'd agree entirely with that statement. I found acceptance and forgiveness hard in some instances. If you try to rush through these stages and try to forgive without dealing with your anger and depression and sadness, the toxic feelings will linger inside. Usually, like with anger, it comes and goes, and we need to revisit often our anger time and time again, and sometimes we need to then forgive once again. I've had to forgive my mom many, many times. I'm sure my daughters had to forgive me many, many times too. But just as you progress in your inner healing, so you need to go back to some of these steps again. So that really is the process of grieving, and when you sort of realize that this is kind of the end of a process, you need to think of who do you need to forgive. It isn't logical from a human perspective to forgive someone for something horrible that they've done, and it doesn't mean that their behavior is necessarily acceptable. But it's a necessary part for you. Not for them, for you. Because otherwise you drag them like an anchor behind you. I think I've mentioned once before that with friendships initially, if they did something to hurt me, I would chop off their heads and leave them lying like a dead body behind me. And wouldn't allow any kind of reconciliation or anything, nor did I have the courage to have an open discussion with them. I was too scared, and so this was my best way, was to kill them off and move on. I had to go back to a lot of people and say to them, I'm really sorry that I did that. Your friendship was actually very valuable to me. Yes, and say to them, it was in my ignorance and my pain and my suffering that I did that, but I hurt you at the same time. It's a necessary part of the healing process to go and say you're sorry to somebody or to ask them for forgiveness. Yeah. This person will no longer have power over you, and you will find God's peace. And that's the truth. The only way, in fact, that you do find peace from particularly toxic parents is through God's peace. And when you've made peace with your own forgiveness, not excusing what they've done. They had their reasons, but it isn't an excuse. But to set yourself free. God desires our healing above all else. The more we heal, the more we can love Him. I am done.
Thank you, Margaret. So we'll end the live stream. Werner, if you can just cut that. Thanks to everyone joining us via the live stream. And then we'll resume if there's any questions, maybe just in the plenary or anything we want to just comment on. And then we'll move into our groups. I think we can probably meet for half an hour until 8. Okay. Thank you. Werner? You cut? Okay, thanks. Anyone wants to